Well, welcome to the 51st annual FWS show and convention. It's wonderful to be back. Everybody agree in person? Yes, me too. So today, this is a technique that isn't done a whole lot, but there are actually two really very nice examples in our show. Kathy George and Jan Fetters both did watercolor on rice paper. They didn't do a batik part to it, but they're very nice examples. I have some rice paper to pass out here. Just pass around, so just throw a couple on one side and a couple on the other side. I learned to do this from a friend of mine, the late, very funny, talented, vivacious, crazy Caroline Sherman. And she still has a YouTube video up called Skillet Batik. So you can refer to that. That's how I learned it. I learned everything you need to know to get started with it. So it is basically painting on rice paper using a hot wax resist, much like you might use masking fluid on watercolor paper, except that at the end, to get rid of it, you iron it out with a hot iron, which I need to think about doing at some point. I don't know whether that's on or not. Yes, it is. So rice paper comes in sheets that are 26 by 38. It's very thin. It's fragile. It's smooth on one side and kind of rough on the other. I think that you can paint on either side. I choose to paint on the smooth side. It is translucent. It is fragile. And especially when it's wet, it's about as strong as wet paper towel or toilet paper. Pardon? I cut it. I think that you could wet the edge and kind of rub it out with your fingernail to get not a decal edge, but a rough edge. So this is gin washi. There are a number of different kinds of rice paper, mulberry. I don't know what they're like to paint on because gin washi is the only one I paint on. At the end, if you want that batik look, you have rice and you crinkle it all up, straighten it out, and then you paint, and the paint will absorb into all the little cracks, giving it that batik look. So I have, please don't laugh at me. Please be kind. I have an image that we're going to paint. It's very simple. This is not great art. It's just a really simple little image, and I have done it with big magic marker so you can see it. There, like that. But I also have something kind of fun to show you right to start with, partly because I'd kind of like to have it dry. This is just silly, but there are all sorts of things that you can use to stamp this with. I mean, you can use a potato masher that goes like this, or cookie cutters. You can dip into the hot wax. Oh, the hot wax here, just plain old canning wax, Gulf wax, and I have a melter here. You can get a skillet, a cheap little skillet, as long as it has a thermostat on it. You want the wax to be about 180 degrees. If it's over 200, it will start smoking and it may burst into flames, ruining your whole day. So this I got from a company. Can you see it? Yes, you can. From a company that sells silk painting things. I think it's Dharma, silk painting stuff. But I have fashioned some little stamps that I can stamp. We're going to get, if I do this right, we'll get little curls in her hair and some other little dots as well. And I think I have another one that's a little bit different size, possibly. Ah, yes. So we'll put some more curls. It takes the wax almost no time to dry. Once you put it down, it just cools a little bit and it's ready to go. You have brushes that are dedicated to wax. Once it's a wax brush, it's always a wax brush. I have been known, when I'm painting with watercolor, to dip my watercolor brush into my glass of wine. Not a good idea. So we're going to try and just do a little bit more painting here and see the little curls come out. If I had more time, we would wait till this dries and then put another layer of wax curls on there and paint it again. But I don't think we have that kind of time. Maybe later we will. It's a good idea to put a paper towel under here. Oh yeah, I have, this is freezer paper. Freezer paper has a shiny side and a dull side. The shiny side is up. That will make the wax, the hot wax, release from the painting pretty easily. When you're doing the watercolor part, it's nice to have a paper towel underneath there. Okay, so what else? Well, let's start with this simple painting, which you have promised that you won't laugh at. First thing you want to do is trace your image. Because it's so thin, you can trace it easily. For purposes of this demo, I've traced it with a big fat Sharpie pen. That's not what you want to use. You want to use a small waterproof marker, like a small fine Sharpie. And the other first thing that you want to do is sign your name. Because once the wax is on here, you won't be able to sign your name. And it also helps you remember which side is up. So to do use a fine point, like a fine point Sharpie or a Micron Pigma pen. And okay, so watercolor on rice paper, the rice paper absorbs it. It runs like fury. It spreads. So you either need to use a really small paintbrush. I think I have a really small paintbrush somewhere. Yes, a really small paintbrush to get into fine areas, or it really lends itself to a kind of a looser style, which is really kind of wonderful. So we'll start by painting a little blue here. This is sort of an homage to Ukraine here with the blue and yellow. It runs easily, so I often don't paint up to the line until my brush is a little bit drier. If it's wet, it will run like fury and go across the line, which is Not bad. You know, you can go with that. So, I'm pretty sure I used Quinn Gold. We'll see. Maybe not. Maybe not. Okay, I'm got to put the paper towel underneath there, or the wax, or the paint may run to a different area just underneath. I'm sorry. I can't hear you. A little louder, somebody. I'm okay? All right, good. And it leaves wet here, which, if you're not careful, will transfer to a different part of your painting where you didn't really want it. You can get very creative with this. This is not an example of creative here. This is just a simple image that I wanted to use as a demonstration because I thought I could get through the whole thing pretty much. This is watercolor, and this is rice paper. No wax. Not yet. We will do wax pretty soon. I have the wax pot. It's all hot and melted, so we're pretty much ready to do that. Magic like the Easy Bake Oven. We'll move on to the next one. So the watercolor paint that's on the paper towel that bled through does not bleed back through? Right. I have a little white board, and your background always needs to be white. A little white board, and it's covered with freezer paper. And the freezer paper will just allow it to bleed back through, so the paper towel will absorb the paint. And right now we're strictly at the watercolor stage. We're not at the hot wax stage, but we will be as soon as I put my brush away so that I don't inadvertently dip a good brush into wax. That would be sad. So we're going to wax the parts that we don't want any further color on. It's much like Frisket or Misket. It runs a little bit like the watercolor on the rice paper, but not nearly as bad. It also drips when you're moving it across. Oh, come on, guys, let's warm up here. Yep, it's on. Is that just plain? It is just plain canning wax from the grocery store. No, you can use beeswax, but it's softer. And if you want to crack it for the batik look, beeswax doesn't really crack very well because it's so soft. Now, if you want, and once in a while, I pull this up because the hot wax will run through, so it sticks to my paper a little bit. So you got to pull it up. and not leave it stick. Yes, that doesn't mean you couldn't experiment and do it on some other thing, but the way to get the wax out is to iron it. So I think you have to be sure that you have something that will tolerate some ironing. Now, if you're not sure where you've covered, what you've covered with the wax, I think you can put a piece of black paper underneath it. And it should make the wax stand out a little bit more. This has all had wax on it. This has not yet. I think that's all waxed. This is not an intricate thing. When you do something more intricate, like Joseph's coat down there, the sheep, or the tea ceremony, it takes more steps. This takes much fewer steps because it's a really simple image. And the wax takes almost no time to dry. And if you let it sit there too long before you peel it off, you might have to warm it up again. All right, I think I've got wax on everything. So then we can cover the wax a little so that I don't inadvertently drop a watercolor brush into it. With more wax, a little more wax. Unless you go off and have lunch, you won't have any trouble pulling it up from here. So, we're not going to do the whole thing here, but a little sand here on the beach, that's not working too well. And you don't have to worry about being careful because the parts you wanted to protect are already covered with wax and they're not going to get any further paint on them. You do have a little trouble if you want to paint. I want to paint a blue sky up here adjacent to the sand, or maybe ocean, I guess, or Gulf. Yes, Gulf. And if one isn't dry and they're two wet adjacent areas, they're really apt to run into each other. And that might be an okay look. I think that this technique really lends itself to free, loose painting. It's what I wish I could do, but it's not really something that I do very well. So my stuff is all pretty planned out. And so let's see if we can find some kind of water-ish thing here. I'm not getting too close to that wet line until it's had a chance. Did I forget my paper towel under here? Why, I sure did. So now you have to wait for this to dry before you can apply any more wax to it. And we're just not going to do that. We're going to get rid of it. Sure. I'm sorry. Yes, I can. I'm usually pretty loud. Is this better? Okay. So before you add any more wax to that, you want to be sure that you let it completely dry. Well, I have an overhead fan in my studio. That helps. You could use a hairdryer, but don't use it on a hot setting, or any wax that you already have on there might melt, and that would probably not be what you'd want to see. So here I have one that is all painted, and it's all waxed. If you want the batik look, the thing to do next is crumple it up. Pardon? I have wax on every surface. And I'm looking for a special newspaper that I had, yes. When you crumple it up, you're going to have a little storm of wax shards everywhere. And they don't play nicely with your vacuum cleaner. And they don't play nicely with your broom. So do it outside, or do it over newspaper that you can then, where you can capture it. It's still fragile, even though it feels tough because it's got wax on it. There's a little painting of a rowboat. I ripped that, crumpling it up. I've mended it, but it's better not to rip it. Better not to rip it in the first place. Okay, so we just crumple it. What? Am I out of range? I'm going to get rid of the newspaper pretty soon. The two lovely examples of painting on rice paper that are in the show this year don't have this batik look. And I can show you right now an example of when batik, a little bit of batik, is nice. Too much. It's just too much. You see this? It's got too much, the batik. When I crumpled it and put the darker watercolor on it, I couldn't see how much was going through, so I put more on it. And I watered it down a little so it would soak through the cracks. And I went and had lunch. Too much is too much. I put wax all over the image, and then I put one more coat of wax on it, over everything. So we have pretty much crumpled it up. I'm going to straighten it out. And we've got some shards of wax here. I don't know if you can see that here. You don't want to have to worry about vacuuming them up, because that's just not okay. So I'm going to get rid of that. And put it back here. Ooh, shoot. Now comes some dark paint, and doesn't really matter a whole lot what color you use as long as it's dark. It should soak through. And this is a hardware store brush. What's upside down? You're right. That's why you sign your name at the bottom, so you don't get confused. Very clever of you. Thank you for rescuing me. I'm sure I have enough to be embarrassed about without that. I don't think it's going to go through. Oh, I know what I wanted to do with this stage here. This can get messy. I have been known to get a little aggressive with this brush here, and then you end up with dark paint on your fingers that, sticks around a while. So, gloves. I'm trying to get it to go in through the little cracks. And it's hard to see, it's hard to tell whether you're successful at that or not until you iron it off. But I know that if I am too aggressive with it and wait too long and water it down too much, I'll end up like the one I just showed you, that it's just too much of the batik look. A little bit is a really kind of a cool look. Too much is too much. Speak louder for me, old lady deaf.
Do you ever use two different colors of paint when you're doing this, or do you want the same color?
What a good idea. I'll try that next. No, basically, I just use something dark. I think that it might be a good idea to kind of tune it into the rest of the colors you have used on your painting. All right, I can see some places where it's going through, so that's good. Now, I don't particularly want all these little blobs of paint to end up necessarily on this painting, so I'm going to use a paper towel and get rid of that. And this is not should not be a good paintbrush. This is a hardware store paintbrush. I have an iron here that I got from Goodwill because I don't really want to use my own iron. Not that I do a lot of ironing, but so now we're going to put this aside. I have these two little Silpat sheets just to protect the table and everything under it from too much heat. And we use newspaper. Silpat, silicone sheets that you can buy in a kitchen store. You can put food on them directly in the oven. They're pretty much heat proof. It's not necessary. I just didn't want to iron through their table here. So we're going to put some newspaper underneath. And I'm going to turn off my melter because I think we're done with it. All right, messy, messy. And now we put more paper on the top. Basically, we're going to iron this until no more wax comes out. It's a good idea not to put too many pieces of paper on the top, otherwise the heat from your iron won't penetrate too many pieces of paper. So a little at a time. And good question. No, I don't. I know that there are other artists that use clean newsprint. I have never had a problem with it coming off. I want to unplug this thing. And move it out of the way. And that's why I just tipped it and a little wax spewed out. And that's why I had the whole thing in a cake pan. Let's hope it's hot. No, I want it on high, high, high. Okay, linen, it's on linen. Okay, some wax is coming through. You can see where you can see the wax. Right now I have 3 layers of newspaper there, and you see how wet and shiny it is? Yeah, melted wax. Uh-huh. I see that my iron is smoking a little. Hopefully it won't burst into flames. That would be, got the fire extinguisher? Yeah, that is, if you decide to do this, don't ever go out of the room leaving your wax skillet turned on. It's just, can be very, very dangerous and can catch on fire. So that's a good idea too. Unfortunately, I don't. I just do it in my studio, but it doesn't seem to be kicking up a lot of bad stuff. So let's change the newspaper underneath too, a little bit. And you do this until no more wax appears on your newspaper. I have framed mine, but there's no reason you can't mount this on a piece of canvas or mount it on a wooden box that you have first painted white, because it does need a white background, or unless you want to be really creative and put it on a colored background, which will then show through and have an impact on your painting. I think we're getting close. Still coming through. There was a lot of wax on there.
While you're doing that, could you just reiterate, go through the bullet points of the steps that you did at the beginning?
Sure. You choose the side of your gin washi that you want to paint on. You trace the image onto it with a fine point permanent marker pen. You put your signature so you'll always know which is the right side up. And you alternately paint with watercolor and mask off the areas you don't want any more paint to get on with the hot wax. The hot wax needs to be about 180 degrees. Hotter than that poses a fire risk. And when you're all done, if you choose a batik look, you crumple it and you put more dark paint in there. This has a little bit of batik. Well, it's on a newsprint, so I guess you can't see it very well. We'll show you on a white paper when I'm done. You want the batik look, you crumple it. If you don't, the two examples of wonderful painting on rice paper in our show didn't have the batik look, but they're beautiful anyway. So I'm having trouble here. Who's talking? Who's talking? Okay. Oh, I guess I can't read your lip. Their names are Kathy George and Jan Fetters. And they're both on the same wall in the gallery. And I'm looking for a piece of, oh shoot. Yes. You can use a little skillet that you don't ever want to use for anything else. This is what we have. And some of that batik came through, not necessarily in cracks, but somewhere, but that's the finished product. The wax pan, you can use a skillet, like a thrift store skillet, as long as it has a temperature gauge on it, because you don't want it hotter than 180 degrees. This I bought specifically for melting wax. It is a wax pot, and I got it at a silk painting online store.
So the pan itself.
This pan has a thermostat on it. I can turn it to 180, which is what I did, and it will heat up to 180 and stay there, and just try and be careful not to put your good watercolor brushes into it.
I put wax in a can.
Yes, if you use a skillet, that is what you should, I'm sorry, thank you so much. If you use a skillet instead of my little wax melter, you should put the wax into an old vegetable can, tin can, take the paper off and put it in there, and then put that in the water, and it'll melt that way. And it's a whole lot safer than trying to melt the wax just in the skillet itself. Well, some kind of metal container that you can put in the hot water. Oh yeah, I forgot. Those little stamps that I used to make the curls on her hair, just copper wire. Let's see, this is 18 gauge. It's stiff enough to hold its shape and not so stiff that you can't work it. Anybody have any other questions? Yes?
So you would do another layer, possibly, if you wanted to use the stamp, put some more wax on it,
Oh,
layer.
can you see the sheep? Where is the sheep? See the curls in the sheep's hair? That's what I did that with. Yes, and that's just a jumping off point for your creativity. You guys are 10 times more creative than I am, so this is just how to do the basics. Thank you. Thank you. Pardon?
Are there any issues with framing?
I have not had a scrap of problems. Some people mount theirs, like glue it to watercolor paper. I have not done that. I haven't found it necessary. None of those are affixed to watercolor paper or anything else other than, a silk hinge at the top like you do with any other watercolor. Yes? I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know how to do it. That's interesting. Wax paper. I don't know how to do that, but that could be very interesting. You may. Sure. Thank you all very much. If there aren't any more questions, that's good. Thank you.